economic developmental models the world is pursuing, more or less almost all the countries of the world have wedded with the policies of capitalism or policies of liberalization, globalization, and privatization. So, in this policy, you can understand how the nature of resources have been honed and managed by the largely to a great extent by the private sector or corporates or industrialists. So, this policy of capitalism, even though is praised by the economist, even though they are being encouraged by many several neoliberal economists, it has its own weaknesses, limitations, and that led to several side effects, several negative impacts. So therefore, there is a urgent need to review some of these policies of capitalism, including many economists nowadays. They have started uh, criticizing the models of capitalism, economic developmental models of capitalism. This including Professor Stiglitz and others. So earlier, Professor Stiglitz used to uh, praise or used to encourage or used to sided with policies of liberalization, neoliberal economic policies. Now he taken a U-turn based on the negative impacts of the liberalization policies, especially in USA. So, in this context, I would like to draw your attention to some of the theories we pursued in the last 1 century and how these policies have led to this present situation where we need to uh, pay attention to sustainable developmental goals and how these sustainable developmental goals need to be integrated in our economic policies and what are the practices that really make development inclusive and sustainable one for every one of us. So let me take you to the new classical economic school of thought. You know that the economists are really powerful in terms of ideas because the economists command extraordinary power of ideas that shape the world economies. So you take from Adam Smith's the book called The Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of Wealth of Nations, published way back in 1776. The economists, even though they are not the kings with swords and other armies, they rule the world through their ideas because these ideas they rule the world today. If you take the Adam Smith idea of laissez-faire policy, liberalization, free trade. So that is the policy of today that is ruling the world. Basically, economists' ideas, particularly Adam Smith's ideas, are ruling the world even today. So therefore, I call these economist ideas are very very powerful. They make difference in our life, our livelihoods. So, in the last, if you take after the Second World War, economists shaped and swayed the world economies in the last 7 decades after 1950s. So that was the time all the countries of the world became independent or achieved independence by the various occupations like British, French, Portuguese, and others. So when the countries become sovereign, so they have followed their own policies. So you know that world was divided on two principles. One is economic models. One is led by USA, that is policy of capitalism. Another block is led by erstwhile USSR, that is socialistic policy of economic development. There are also the third or the those who have not joined these two blocks. They are called as Commonwealth nations. So, including India, they followed their own economic policies called mixed economic policies. And so, this is how world has divided in on the models they pursued to achieve higher economic growth and development. So in this context, even though I say that economic ideas are very, very powerful in making economic development, at the same time, some of the bad ideas of economists, they are also cause for present situation. But sometimes economists say that it is not the economists are directly reasonable or directly a cause for this type of situation, but political parties or politicians have to be blamed for their misuse of these economic policies, uh, and so they blame each other sometimes. Sometimes politicians blame economists and economists blame politicians. But one needs to understand that the power of ideas, especially economists, are very, very powerful, and they create wealth and also they create poverty. I mean to say that they can create abundance of wealth, at the same time they can create poverty or squalor. So this is the situation in some of the South Asian countries and also largely in Africa and Latin American countries. In this regard, the story of economic growth was tremendous, which drastically improved the living conditions throughout the world. At the same time, created inequitable and unsustainable economies. So if you look at the today's world, which is more inequitable when compared to 1950s, when compared to 1980s, when compared to 1990s. So today we have a world which is more unsustainable, more inequitable in terms of income and wealth are concerned. There are many reports, the World Income Inequality Report, you can see even Sustainable Development Reports, even Human Development Reports, even environmental indices reports, you can see. There are several reports available for verification. So today the main agenda of economists is to how to address the growing inequality in the world, income and wealth inequality in the world. What are the instruments or measures one can take to reduce the this growing the difference between the growing distance between haves and have not. So another important thing is that on the one hand, the world is creating abundance of opportunities. On the other hand, the world is also creating more uncertainties in terms of inflation, in terms of geopolitical trade situation, like Trump has announced 50% tariff on India. This creates more under the globalization, even though we are in the globalization era, but these type of um, uh, policies are creating more troubles, more impediments for free movement of goods and services. So another issue is that as a result of these growing uncertainties and risks, the cost of living is increasing, not only because of inflation, but more importantly because of health issues and because of many other issues, natural disasters such as climate change and climate change led natural disasters. You might have seen in recent times, almost all the countries, whether they are rich or the poor, they are facing the wrath of the nations, wrath of the nature. That is, you look at California state. Wildfire. If you take the recent floods in America, recent cloud burst in Uttarakhand, and everywhere you can see that these policies of economic development ultimately have created more uncertainties and risks for the world population today. So this clearly shows that this situation, the idea of economists are both they are right when they are wrong. So sometimes Adam Smith idea was right at that time, but Keynes criticized that idea and he propounded his own theory. So that idea may be good at that time, and the Adam Smith idea may be good at that time, but may not be good at this present time. So this is how we need to understand because of limitations of the knowledge and given the circumstances of that time. So the economists have propounded the theories based on the prevailing situation. So those economic theories and models may not be applicable in the present context, but still we are wedded with some of these old policies. They may create have wealth at the same time they may create poverty. So this is the way we need to understand that sometimes the ideas, economist ideas are powerful to create wealth at the same time they create more problem for us. So how to substantiate this type of statement or this statement? Today, the world economies, if you look at the failure of the neoclassical doctrine, today the world economies are formed by the economic problems that constantly worries the humanity as they challenge the human well-being and sustenance. So why I was uh, uh, overemphasizing the risks and uncertainty was that the world today is faced with several problems. Take, for example, COVID-19 that has endangered everyone's life on this earth. Even today's climate change and frequency of natural disasters in terms of earthquake, floods, forest fire, and depletion of natural resources, and emergence of COVID type of health risks, and growing pollution in almost all the urban areas, especially in developing countries, and growing poverty, not only income poverty, other multidimensional poverty, growing wealth and income inequality, and growing inflation and hunger also. So these type of problems are constantly worry the economist how to address these problems, whether the growth alone helps to mitigate this type of problem. So the big question before us is whether we aspired this type of growth and development, such as mass production and mass consumption under capitalism, which resulted in economic inequality and environmental degradation. So economic development is to create more opportunities for every one of us throughout the world, but it is creating more adversely the economic inequality. On the other hand, the resources that need to be reserved or preserved for the future generation are excessively being drained or consumed by the present generation that will create more sustenance issues for the future generation. So in this way, some of the economic developmental ideas are myopic in nature, short-lived, not sustainable one or long lasting. So this type of issues have emerged after 1970s onwards, whether the development goals or the models we are pursuing, are they able to sustain the life on the earth and equitably share the resources we have endowed in this world? So, in this context, we need to understand that economic growth and development are the short term and long term phenomenon which are highly influenced by the economic policies of the contemporary economic doctrine or theories of economists. So, today we are pursuing the policy of capitalism. They are influenced by neoclassical economist school of thought, economic school of thought. So they always promote private investment or the direct foreign direct investment. They always support owning of resources in the hands of the private sector or corporates or industrialists. And government intervention should be limited, and the market should be allowed to work freely, and that will create its own equilibrium through interplay of supply and demand. Even interest rates, prices, and everything will be based on the scarcity value of the resources, so that the price will reflect the scarcity value of resources. Therefore, government should not intervene. So this is the policy of neoliberal economic school of thought. Whether these type of policies have a last, are they going to last forever, or they are going to be short-lived? This is the big question we need to ask at this juncture. So, a continuation of the failure of neoclassical doctrine. If one looks at carefully the economic growth theories, classical and neoclassical economists, these theories, of course, they have assumed certain things, other things are being equal. Ceteris paribus, you know that, all the economist faculty, you know that. So they depend heavily on a few factors of production. That is, even today, we use only few factors of production for understanding the economic growth theories. That is land, labor, capital, and organization. And there are several other capitals and resources that need to be considered in the growth stories of economic model. So if you look at the more emphasis has been given to man-made capital and human resources. So they are the biggest contributors of economic development. And of course, they are the biggest contributors because the natural resources, you know that they are largely not priced. It means that they don't have market for fixation of prices except exhaustible resources like fossil fuels, the gold, and precious metals. If you take the water and air and sunshine and also the fish and others, they are mostly free goods even today. So therefore, the economists have considered for their benefit and with their own limited knowledge, they considered the role of man-made capital and the human resource, human capital in the story of economic development, and they grossly neglected the role or contribution of environmental resources, including the water, biodiversity, climate, forest, soil, etc., in the economic growth story. So when we neglect these resources in the policy as well as in theory, so these resources are tend to be over exploited because they are considered to be free good when they are available abundant. And As a result, these resources have been exploited beyond their carrying capacity, behind their rejuvenation or renewal in case of renewable resources. And some of the exhaustible resources are going to be exhausted in the coming years, especially the fossil fuels. So these type of scarcity of natural resources have started creating um, uh, the side effects for economic development, side effects for the very living itself through pollution, through climate change, through increasing uses of high doses of fertilizers, chemical pesticides. Even the land has become barren, and the water is polluted, the air is polluted, and we are bearing the health cost, increasing health cost. Recently, I conducted a study in Udupi. We have there is a thermal power project, Udupi Power Corporation Limited, and in and around there are lots of pollution that led to so many health issues. I was one of the NGT expert committee member. We have imposed around 52 crores as a environmental compensation to be paid by the UPCL, owned by the Adani group of company, to the local communities for suffering for last 1 decade. So I mean to say that some of these developments, they are very important. At the same time, they are creating more side effects. So therefore, I even suggested in the meeting we conducted in the UPCL, Udupi Power Corporation Limited, we should adopt the policy of live and let live. So of course, the factories and firms are very important for generation of employment opportunities. At the same time, the very livelihood of the people in and around the factories should not be affected. They have a right to live on this uh, in that ecosystem or environment in that village. So in this way, we need to understand the growth stories sometimes created more wealth, at the same time more environmental problems. The theoretical models of neoclassical schools mainly used mathematical models or techniques which are devoid of empirical science or failed to explain the actual economy. So the one of the major limitations of economists is that they take the shelter under the guise of assumption that other things being equal, these are the variables, these are the dependent and independent variables, they matter, they decide the economic growth story. So in this way, many growth models in development studies you might have seen, the Herard Domer model, the Schumpeterian models, and Lewis model, and many other models, they are devoid of empirical science but they fail to explain the actual economy. For example, if you look at the classical economists led by Adam Smith and neoclassical school by Jevons, Walter, Pareto, and modern growth theories by Herard and Domer, they modeled that growth is a function of capital stock and savings and investment, and that play an important role. Of course, they play an important role. But there are other factors, other resources, they also play an important role that needs to be taken into account. If you look at the recent World Bank report on middle income trap, they focus more on the investment, innovation, and investment, innovation, and also the what is that investment, innovation, and also the one more thing is that investment, innovation, and also the skill development. So that is going to play an important role. Of course, I agree with that one, but at the same time, the role played by the uh, natural resources should also be taken into account. So overall, the economists appreciated and overconfident about human and physical capital, rather conveniently neglected the contribution of natural capital in the economic growth story. So obviously, economists are survived because of their assumptions and most importantly, the ceteris paribus, all other things being unchanged and constant. So, what is the outcome of the neoliberal economic policies followed for the last several decades? So, markets have failed to recognize the contribution of natural capital in economic growth that led to overexploitation of natural resources due to market failure. Market does not appreciate or recognize the price of or value of resources, causing widespread environmental pollution and degradation, including we arrived at climate change. Even today, there is a lack of valuation of environmental resources in the policy making. So you might have seen many developmental policies, they overlook the environmental resources or they don't consider environmental aspects while deciding on the developmental policies. So if you look at the GDP, present GDP estimates, GDP does not take into account the depreciation of natural resources. So I was asking questions. Take, for example, there are a number of disasters in the country. For example, Himachal Pradesh, there are lots of disasters. In Uttarakhand, lots of disasters. In Kerala, disasters took place. So there is loss of life and loss of resources, including houses, employment opportunities, resources, etc. But are they being considered in the GDP, depreciated the GDP of these state resources? For example, Himachal Pradesh, nearly 40% of the GSDP comes from the tourism activities. But after the disasters, tourism has been affected, but the GSDP has been reduced? No, we don't know. So in this way, the GDP estimations even today, they are highly having flaws or their number is highly superficial. They just add up something and show it to the statistics. So based on that, we estimate and project and forecast economic developments. So what I mean to say that, so all these economic policies and practices should be practical in nature, should be more relevant in policy decisions, and they should appreciate the truth and the prevailing circumstances. Then only we are in a position to take a very good policy decision to address some of the issues, problems we face at the grassroots level. This is one side story. Then second side story is that look at the understanding of welfare and well-being. What is that welfare? You know that in various consumption theories, you might have studied the how the utility is estimated, how the uh, theories of consumption behavior, they've explained the utilities and welfare and well-being. And there are the new developments in the theory of classical and neoclassical theories of consumption, consumer behavior, and theory of demand, and theory of price, etc. So we have come to the theories in recent time. These include the behavioral economics and also the contribution made by the Amartya Sen uh, for the welfare economics and how he contributed to the development of human development indicators. So divide of uh, that is away from the narrow definition of welfare and well-being, which are being considered with the income approach. So there is no developmental or well-being approach developed earlier. Now the new school of thoughts in welfare economics, they have developed the new techniques, new indicators to measure the welfare and well-being. Therefore, we now reach to the stage that we are come out with multi-dimensional poverty indices. Even other indices also we consider for human development index arrival. So the narrow understanding of welfare and well-being in terms of utility or satisfaction based on materialistic consumption and wealth accumulation gave rise to economic or income inequality at the cost of environmental degradation. So if you look at the capitalism, policy of capitalism, all the people are given an impression that if you have money, you can survive on this world. So the market forces are forcing you to work more, earn more, and spend more. As a result, all the at the same time, the even though there are increasing economic opportunities in terms of employment and we can get reasonably good wages, the spiraling prices due to inflation. Take, for example, the real estate prices, you take, for example, of other essential goods, that we are not in a position to catch up with these increasing prices. So therefore, the market forces are making us to work, work, work. And there is there are people who do not value themselves. There are people who do not take interest in the affairs of the nation, affairs of the government. There are no people to criticize nowadays on the government policies. There are no strikes nowadays because people are highly preoccupied with self-interest. That is, their survival is most important than nation's survival. But they don't know the nation combines the people of India, people of all of us. So, except A.C. Pigu, who propounded economic instruments for internalizing externalities such as pollution, so he made several efforts how to make development more sustainable, more long lasting, and how the parties which are being affected with negative externalities should be compensated, and how social capital should be taken into consideration in policy, etc. So further, Amartya Sen, who tried to include human development as a development indicator for welfare, he broadened the idea of welfare. And there are some countries, including Bhutan state, believes and successful in forcing the World Bank to recognize that happiness as a welfare indicator based on equality and sustainable development. You know that Bhutan is a small hilly state. People are very happy even though they don't possess more income, more wealth, more assets, and their longevity is high, their happiness is very high, and they are close to the nature, they believe in nature, and they drink good water, they live in a good environment. So they value these resources are more important than the resources we possess, such as man-made resources, including houses, including cars, including clothes, including many other day-to-day uh, uh, resources we enjoy. So this capitalism and environmental degradation, they have a strong relationship. If you look at the capitalist They strongly believe that economic gains will be distributed and percolated to all the sectors. This is the strongest belief of capitalists, and there are no theories to support this one. But they says that there is a percolation effect. So the percolation effect in the sense that the economic development that takes place, that percolates just like water percolates to the bottom, it percolates to the low strata of society. That is the capitalists who are strongly selling this idea of percolation effect. So, and this theory says that the development will percolate to all the sectors, all the regions, and all the people, irrespective of their economic status, social status, etc., in the process of economic development. So, this idea is based on the one more theory called Simon Kuznets hypothesis that clearly says that an inverted U-shaped relationship exists between economic development and income inequality. So it says that in the beginning of the economic development, the income inequality increases. After reaching a point, economic development continues and income inequality reduces. So, as countries develop, inequality would increase until a certain tipping point, after which it would start to follow. This is the assumption. But this assumption has been disproved in many countries of the world, even Thomas Piketty and others. They proved that, they disproved that this type of relationship may not be there if you take increasing income inequality and also environmental degradation. So this same model or theory has been extended to environmental economics too. So they borrowed the idea of Simon Kuznets hypothesis. They renamed it as a environmental Kuznets curve in environmental economics. So this EKC hypothesis, environmental Kuznets curve hypothesis, it states that so in the early stages of economic growth, pollution or emission increase and environmental quality declines. But beyond some level of per capita income, the economic growth leads to environmental improvement. So this is the another hypothesis. In the beginning, in the initial stages of economic development, just like income inequality, pollution and environmental quality declines. After reaching a tipping point, the environmental growth contributes to improvement in the environmental quality. So this is the theoretical foundation of EKC. But in reality, if you take the growing income inequality and also environmental degradation throughout the world, both hypotheses have failed in terms of reducing the income inequality and also conservation of environmental resources. So I am giving all this theoretical background why SDGs have come to UNO has admitted and as a policy goals for 2030. So these both policies have failed to prove themselves. So as a result, new liberal economic policies of capitalism have contributed to income inequality and also environmental degradation, which has become a byproduct of unsustainable trends in consumption and production, patterns of neoliberal policy, which basically relies on a weak view of sustainability. There are two types of school of thoughts. One is weak sustainable development school or weak sustainability school. Another one is strong sustainability school. So the strong sustainability school of thought is more or less vetted or supported by the environmental economist, and the strong sustainability school is more or less supported by the ecological economist, and the weak sustainability school of thought is more supported by the environmental economist. So this is the main difference between the weak and strong sustainability. The weak sustainability school of thought clearly says that as long as three capitals or three resources such as natural resource, human resource, and man-made resource, if there are two resources, like say for example human resources and man-made resources or man-made capital, they try to grow or they tend to grow, and they replace the natural resources with the man-made capital. As long as overall capital is increasing or per capita capital is increasing over a period of time, there is no problem. It means that you can take out natural resources and put it in the human resource and put it in the man-made resource like infrastructure, economic infrastructure, and social infrastructure. There is no problem. But in contrast to that weak sustainability school, the strong sustainability school propounded by the ecological economist, they strongly believe that nature cannot be replaced, or nature cannot be replaced or replicated or substituted by any other resources like human resources and man-made capital. So nature has its own functions, uniqueness, and that cannot be reproduced by our own efforts, including the scientists cannot produce some of these things. So therefore, all the resources should be intact over a period of time, and there is always a carrying capacity for the natural resources that should not be undermined by the economic development. So this is the fundamental difference between the strong and the weak sustainability school of thought. One school says that you can use natural resources for compensating or developing the human and man-made resources. That is the policy of capitalism now we are following. The another school of thought is that strong sustainability school that always says that you preserve the nature, you preserve the environment, and also make economic development without compromising on the resources that are meant for present as well as future generation. So this assumes that the only necessary the weak sustainability school I have already explained. So in this way, there are differences of opinion by the economists themselves about the economic development, and more or less the weak sustainability school has been promoted and appreciated and implemented. As a result, we have reached to this stage. Look at the what is this stage? This stage is that we have recently uh, uh, come across climate change and United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is Assessment Report 6, what it says. Where are we now? So this UN IPCC assessment report, it is based on physical science basis, and it assesses the overall climate change in the last 50 years. So on an average, 1 degree Celsius of climate change has increased. In 1950s, if you take climate on an average climate, it was less than zero. It was almost minus. Now, if you take on an average climate change, it is 1 degree Celsius. So we have reached the 1 degree Celsius, and this may go to 2 degrees Celsius in the end of the century. Already 1.5 degrees Celsius we are going to reach in the coming 2040s. So therefore, this report clearly says that uh, the climate change is unequivocal that humans have warmed the planet Earth, causing widespread and rapid changes to Earth oceans, ice caps, and land surfaces, where we went wrong in economic policies. So, therefore, I was asking the same question, do we need this type of development that compromises on our health, that threatens our livelihood, that threatens the life on the earth, that creates more uncertainty and risks? So, where are we now? So, you know that the circular flow of global warming or climate change, economic growth leads to emissions of CO2. Mainly, we emit CO2 because we use fossil fuels for electricity production, running our cars, producing goods and services by the industry. And in many ways, even today, 90% of the world energy requirement is met by the fossil fuels. So, therefore, if you look at the economic development of China, China, which is using almost 25% of the energy needs of the world because it has become a factory for the world. It is producing every product for the world required now. Therefore, its economic development was very faster in 1980s to till 1990s, 1995. Almost it was growing on an average GDP growth rate of 12 to 15%. So economic growth leads to overconsumption of fossil fuels that leads to emission of CO2 through driving, heating and cooking, air travel, etc. So these rising CO2 concentration and other forces lead to climate change, that is increase in temperature, precipitation, sea level rise. So this climate change would have not been considered very seriously if they are not imposing any economic cost. Basically, they are imposing ecological and economic cost on us. Therefore, we need to take the climate change very seriously. So, climate change imposes ecological and economic impacts that leads to lower agriculture productivity growth and coastal submergence or flooding. Ocean acidification creates more frequent weather disturbances in terms of cyclones, in terms of flooding, in terms of precipitation. So these type of policies led by economic development that resulted in climate change needs to be brought into economic policies and practices. These climate change policies, which are adaptation and mitigation policies, basically two category. And we need to reduce emissions on the one hand by reducing the consumption of fossil fuels. We should put a trade cap on use of fossil fuels. We need to shift to greener energy, efficient energy, and we need to change to new technology. And as I mentioned earlier, ACPGU has suggested several economic instruments, including polluter pay principle, carbon taxes, and pollution taxes to mitigate these type of side effects. So therefore, the policies including climate change policies or climate mitigation and adaptation policies, including reduction in emissions through afforestation programs and preserving the water bodies, etc. And also mitigation, adaptation of certain crops, certain changes in our behavior that will also help in reduction in carbon emissions, including reduction in plastic consumption, uh, reduction in wastage of food we eat, and reducing the consumerism in terms of buying everything when we go to market, etc. We need to change behavioral aspects also. So this is how the world is moving. But there are also international efforts how to address economic development along with sustainable development. So even today, there is complete divide of ideas among the economists. You know that we learned in the while we are studying in the PG, there are six economists come out with seven policies or seven opinions. Like that, these economists always they don't come to a, a a definite decision on economic growth and economic policies. This has been the curse for the economist. If you look at the 1972 Stockholm Conference, for the first time, the Stockholm Conference was held in Stockholm to discuss about the economic development and health of the planet and health of the people. So the 1972 Stockholm Conference marks the first major global gathering to place environmental issues at the forefront of the international agenda, linking environment and developmental concerns. So this Club of Rome, it is also called as Club of Rome, you have come out with a definition called limits to economic growth, LTG. So they clearly stated that a finite world of finite resources will not support indefinite growth in the extraction of those resources. It means that we have a limited resources and these resources should not be unregulatedly exploited over a period of time that will limit our growth itself. So therefore, it is better to limit our growth, limit our needs, limit our desires, or especially we should limit our the greediness. That is more important. So, but that time, one thing which has led to one policy outcome was that the even many people mention most of the countries have started regulating the environment or environmental pollution. So, as a result of that conference, Stockholm Conference, almost all the countries of the world have started establishing pollution control boards. Even India under Indira Gandhi have established pollution control boards. Even now we have state and central pollution control boards. So followed by after a decade, almost one and a half decade, there is a World Commission on Environment and Development in 1987, constituted by the United Nations. They submitted a report called Our Common Future that clearly gave a definition of sustainable development. That the sustainable development is that meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability to meet the needs of the future generation. So therefore, the humanity has a limit to make economic development, and we need to restrict ourselves to meet our own needs rather than greeds. So we need to preserve resources not only for present generation but also for future generation. So after this conference, almost after the one and a half decade, once again there was a Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where almost all the young children they attended this Earth Summit. The summit, the declaration they took is that the earth is not borrowed by our ancestors, this earth is borrowed from our children. So we are using the resources meant for our children. So therefore, there should be a limit for economic growth. So these are all the some of the international efforts. They try to understand the contextualize the economic development and understand the models of economic development understand the situation that led to environmental degradation. But you know that there are several multilateral organizations, including United Nations Organization, UNO. Apart from that, IMF is there, World Bank is there, now WTO is there. There are several other organizations are also there, IPCC, for example, etc. But these multilateral agencies, they also divide in ideas. For example, if you take World Bank, if you take WTO, if you take IMF, they are in support of capitalism. They are the strongest supporters of capitalism, whereas United Nations, UNEP, IPCC, UNESCO, and others, they are in support of sustainable development. So, but both the schools of thoughts, they are not going in hand. But the economists who are in IMF, World Bank, and WTO, they still think in the direction of weak sustainability school that clearly says that you can grow and pollute the environment and correct the environment and bring back the environment like that. But other school of thought by United Nations, they want to pursue sustainable development. And the reason they are giving increasing health cost, increasing environmental disasters, increasing resource being overexploited by the people. So both the ideas are not going hand in hand. So further, but if you take the United Nations first, you just forget the IMF, World Bank, and WTO. So, what are the efforts by the United Nations in terms of sustainable development? So, there was a Millennium Developmental Goals implemented in 2000 until 2015 to address the issues of global poverty, education, health, and inequality, but left significant gaps in environmental sustainability, economic inclusiveness, and governance. They understood that the world is still facing the problems of environmental sustainability and inequality and poor governance. So, therefore, the Rio Plus 20 Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in 2012, it took a decision and called for universal integrated framework linking economic growth with social inclusion and environmental protection. So this is the Rio Plus 20 United Nations Conference that mooted the idea that along with economic development, we need to have a social inclusion and environmental protection. So in 2015, 193 United Nations member states formally adopted the 17 Sustainable Developmental Goals as a blueprint for people, planet, and prosperity. Three P's, triple P. That is people, planet, and prosperity. So they have set the agenda for 2030 to achieve these goals. So, Agenda 2030 was formulated as a comprehensive action plan committing all nations, developed and developing, to shared responsibility for global sustainability. So, this has led to transition from Millennium Developmental Goals, that is MDGs, to SDGs, reflected a shift towards a universal holistic approach encompassing economic, social, and environmental goals or dimensions. So SDGs is nothing but which inclusive of economic goals, social goals, and environmental goals. This is the reason where this is the origin of SDGs, Sustainable Developmental Goals. So these are the 17 Sustainable Developmental Goals. These, you know that very well. First one is no poverty. Second one is zero hunger. Third one is good health and well-being. Fourth one is quality education. Fifth one is gender equality. Sixth one is clean water and sanitation. Seventh one is affordable and clean energy. Eighth one is decent work and economic growth. Ninth one is industry, innovation and infrastructure. 10th one is reduced inequalities. 11th one is sustainable cities and communities. 12th one is responsible consumption and production. And 13th one is climate action. 14th, life below water. 15th, life on land. 16th, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And last one is the partnership for the goals. So these goals are sometimes considered as a goals of unachievable. Sometimes they are very towering goals type of thing. But let us see how these goals have been adapted by the signatory countries and what is the status in achieving each goal. So these SDGs goals, as already I have mentioned, there are three, they can be classified or clubbed into economic goals, social goals, and environmental goals. So the sustainable development goals are the blueprint or policy blueprint with the universal call to action to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. So just I have classified these goals into SDGs can be classified into four categories. I have classified into four categories instead of three categories. One is social goals 1 to 6, economic goals 8 to 12, environmental goals 17, 13, 14, 15, and the last goal I have included is the governance goal. Governance means that administration. That is 16 and 17. So, however, there are no synergies or convergence of policies of multilateral agencies already I have mentioned to achieve sustainable future. So, on the one hand, United Nations calls for sustainable developmental goals. On the other hand, IMF, IBRD, WTO, they rely on neoliberal economic policies of growth. However, United Nations, UNEP, UNESCO, WHO, IPCC, among others, call for SDGs and Sustainable Development Goals. I mean to say they are not support IMF and IBRD, WTO. They are also supporting Sustainable Developmental Goals, but overarching importance has been given to growth rather than the Sustainable Developmental Goals. So, what are the economic theories behind sustainable developmental goals? So, already I have mentioned that the welfare economics emphasizes the optimizing social welfare by considering equity, distribution, and quality of life, moving behind GDP as the sole measure of progress. So, environmental economics addresses market failures by incorporating environmental cost into economic decisions through tools such as pigment taxes, tradable pollution permits, and regulation. The inclusive growth, inspired by Amartya Sen's capability approach, prioritizes expanding individuals' freedom, opportunities, and access to resources to ensure no one is left behind. So the green growth or sustainable growth theory advocates for achieving economic expansion while reducing environmental degradation. So you can expand economic growth at the same time you have to reduce environmental degradation, promoting resource efficiency, especially energy efficiency and less pollution, less waste and recycling of waste or using the model of circular economy like that. So promoting resource efficiency and fostering low carbon developmental pathways. So these are the some of the theories which promoted the sustainable developmental goals, or these are the theories which are behind the sustainable framing of sustainable developmental goals. So why we need to integrate sustainable developmental goals into economic policy? So you know that I have explained in the neoclassical theory of economic thoughts and their implications. So economic policies shape economic growth to deliver a long-term resilience and inclusivity. So therefore, these sustainable developmental goals should be integrated to the macroeconomic policies of the sovereign governments. So these economic policies ensure resources are being allocated for sustainable development to both present and as well as future societal needs. So these economic policies strengthen the global competitiveness by aligning with the international sustainability commitments, including Paris Agreement and Kyoto Protocol. There are several other agreements for protection of environment, protection of water, or protection of water bodies, protection of the resources, including the atmosphere and including the air pollution, etc. Health is also embedded in protection of environmental resources. So this economic policy builds public trust and investor confidence through transparent, sustainable practices. If the policies are more sustainable, they take into account the sustainability of resources. For example, availability of water resources for establishment of industries. There is always a conflict of interest between the states. Whenever there is a shortage of water in Bangalore, the Chennai and Hyderabad and even in Trivandrum, they welcome the software engineering company, software engineers or software companies to come and establish. We provide water like that. So therefore, public trust, or especially industries, they even they interviewed me. Several industries have interviewed me about availability of water resources in Bangalore city. I have always explained that water is available, but it is not managed properly. So that was the opinion I have given to all the industries. They have a confidence on government of Karnataka. They water being available for industrial